So for chapter 17, pouring out one's thoughts, Rebbe Nachman says, and this is his core practice. I mean, this is the foundation for the Breslauer spirituality, just in the same way that rising in the middle of the night is the cornerstone of Islamic spirituality and Carthusian spirituality, just like it's been done for 700 years in the Nichiren Shoshu tradition in Japan, and the list goes on and on. If you look deeply enough into any major spiritual tradition, Yoga Nidra in the Vedanta tradition, the list goes on and on. You'll find that they have what we call green meditation, that there is this gap hour or two that opens in the middle of the night. And people who spend any length of time in contemplation, especially in a communal setting, eventually evolve this kind of relationship to light and dark. If you want to go really deep into your spiritual life, and you have the time and the devotion to do that, this is where it leads. Rebbe Nachman teaches his disciples, of course, to rise in the night and to pour out their thoughts. He says, it is very good to pour out one's thoughts before God, like a child pleading before its parent. He also says, we are taught, whether good or evil, you are always called his children, always called children of God. Likewise, he says, sometimes God helps the person and he can then express his thoughts more clearly, like a 4 or 5-year-old child. I love this sentence. Sometimes God helps the person and he can then express his thoughts more clearly, like a 4 or 5-year-old child. Now, normally we would think that one would need help from God or a higher power or from the Buddha or one's samadhi or whatever you want to call it, in order to express thoughts that are significantly elevated above the level of a 4 or 5-year-old child. We like to think that that's sort of where we start, and we progress from there. But Rebbe Nachman knows that a 4 or 5-year-old child conversing intimately and spontaneously with God like a parent is in fact occupying the deepest and loftiest place that a human being can attain. He says, therefore it is very precious before God when people try to speak to him. He says, but if one cannot speak clearly, even the broken phrases of a 2 or 3-year-old are very precious in God's eyes. So he gets younger and younger. He says, one must keep this in its simple sense. Since it is our eternal life, it is impossible to pass through this world without it, since our only power is that of speech. Since our only power is that of speech. Now, this is a very interesting statement. Our only power is the power of speech. What exactly does that mean? Because we like to think that we have many powers. We have physical powers, we have intellectual powers, we have force of will, many different, we have sort of an emotional power, emotional force, life force. He says our only power is the power of words. What he means is, Rebbe Nachman is talking about a world that really begins with the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. Okay? I'm not talking in Kabbalistic terms at all here about how those 22 letters in various combinations basically are almost like neutrons and electrons and protons and so forth that sort of make up our reality. A lot of mystically minded Jews believe that. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about language. Language constructs our reality. Once we get beyond the level of a 2 or a 3-year-old child, and certainly by the time we get to be a 4 or a 5-year-old child, and much less when we become adults, our whole reality is constructed out of words. It's made out of words. Words are how we describe our feelings to ourselves. Words are how we build our reality. You take a person's words away, and the mind becomes extraordinarily still and calm and pure and serene. and our bodies and our minds simply return to their nature. It looks like a kind of a regression, but it's simply a falling back into a state that precedes the verbal consciousness of the discriminative mind. So when Rebbe Nachman talks about the broken phrases of a very young child, or even a younger child than that, a 2 or 3 year old with just a few words, power of speech, he's talking about getting back to that level of reality and spontaneous communication that is really pre-verbal. It's really pre-verbal. I don't know if you've had this experience or not, but if you ever do any kind of spontaneous prayer, not just like the chanting of gathas or sutras or hymns or whatever it is that you may have chanted or prayed like liturgically in a group, but rather spontaneous prayer, we're actually talking to your higher power. When you do that for any length of time, like let's say for longer than 20 or 30 minutes, let's say you go on for 40 or even 50 minutes, you reach the hour point. At a certain point, the language begins to break down. There are a lot of theories for why this is so. Part of it is that there's not an actual person on the other end of it. And so it's a little bit like playing tennis by yourself without a backboard. If you have a backboard and you hit the ball keeps coming back to you, but it's like being at a golfing range when you're praying like this. You're just hitting ball after ball out into the blue yonder. You're speaking and talking like this. And that great silence, and if you're doing it at night, it's a dark, depthless silence that you are speaking into and you are pouring your soul out into. And as the words go and they leave you, they begin to subside, so that finally you don't even have full sentences left. You have phrases, or sometimes only single words, and eventually finally only really almost impulses. If you want to visualize what this is like, it's like taking a cup full of water and pouring it out. Well, when you first start to pour it, it comes out in a very steady stream. And it hits the ground and makes a certain kind of sound. But as you tilt it more and more and more, it steadily becomes a trickle. Even toward the end, the trickle is still a steady stream. Okay, it's a flow of consciousness. It has a kind of a coherence to it. It has a kind of a reason, a flow, a logic, a linear quality. But then there comes a point when you've tilted it so much so that it's all flowed out and there are only drops. The drops can go on for quite some time until finally the last drop falls and the cup is empty. And that's really how this practice is done. And when you reach that point, when they're just the drops coming out, you really have become like a 2 or 3 year old child. And everyone knows that when a 2 or 3 year old child cries, his parent comes and grasps it up. And that's what happens. That's how the practice works. We feel ourselves embraced.